Hello and welcome. The light never quite fades here. It hovers somewhere between the last breath of sunset and the first true whisper of night. That perfect amber hour where the world feels suspended in something sacred. Every leaf catches the glow and holds it. Every branch filters it into long, drifting ribbons of warmth that fall slowly across the forest floor like threads of pure gold. And in that quiet, somewhere deep within the ancient wood, you begin to feel it. A pull, a recognition, as though some older, deeper part of you, some fragment that existed long before this life and will continue long after, has always known this place, always been reaching toward it. This is Arvandor, the eternal glade, the first and most sacred home of the Elven people across all of existence. It is a place that sits not upon any map you could hold in your hands, not within any forest that breathes beneath a mortal sky. Arvandor rests in the outer plains, within the vast and verdant expanse known as Arborea, that great, wild realm where passion and life and ancient beauty reign above all else. The plain of Arborea is enormous, incomprehensibly so, but within it, Arvandor holds a place of singular reverence. It is the divine domain of the Seldarine, the Elven pantheon, and it has been here since before the first elf ever opened their eyes upon the material plane. Before we dive into the details, please consider subscribing to the channel. It is the surest way to find your path back to our library of lore when you wake. Section 1. The Silver Shore of Arvandor. What most mortal histories do not tell you is that Arvandor was not always elven. Long before the Seldarine made it their home, this part of Arborea was held by giant deities. Corellin drove them out. He came with purpose and with power, and with the clear intention of making a home for himself and for the people he was in the process of creating. And the giant gods yielded or were pushed, and what they left behind became the foundation upon which the most beautiful divine realm in the known cosmology was built. There are still ruins here, if you know where to look. Enormous stone foundations, architectural remnants of a scale that speaks to giant hands, half submerged in the roots of ancient trees that have grown through and around them over the long ages since the conquest. The forest has absorbed these ruins with complete patience, the way any living thing eventually absorbs what it outlasts. And they sit now as a kind of memory in the soil, the record of a prior claim that the plane has long since moved past. To understand Arvandor, you first need to understand what it means for a place to be a divine domain in the outer planes. When a god makes a home in the cosmos, that home becomes a reflection of everything they are. Their will shapes the landscape. Their nature bleeds into the soil, the sky, and the air. The rivers run with the currents of their thoughts, and the forests grow tall with the reach of their ambitions. A divine domain is not simply a place a god lives. It is a place a god is. And Arvandor, shaped by not one, but an entire family of elven deities, carries within it the full breadth of what the elven spirit has always meant. Beauty, art, grace, the long, patient view of eternity, the sharp edge of silver blades held in hands that understand both war and wonder. And underneath all of it, a grief so ancient and so deep that it has become indistinguishable from love. The elves of Faerun speak of Arvandor not as a destination, but as a homecoming. Across every elven culture, regardless of whether they walk the forests of the surface world, sail the open seas, or dwell in the stone halls beneath the earth, there is some memory of Arvandor. Not a memory any individual elf carries in their waking mind, necessarily, but something encoded far deeper. Something that surfaces during the reverie, that meditative trance that elves enter instead of true sleep. In the reverie, elves do not dream the way humans dream. They relive. They experience their memories again with perfect clarity. They sit within moments of their past and feel them fully. And in that space between waking and returning, they sometimes brush against something older than memory. They brush against Arvandor itself, that golden light filtering through leaves that no mortal forest has ever grown. And for just a moment, something in them settles. The landscape of Arvandor is breathtaking in a way that defies easy description. Ancient trees rise here to heights that no mortal forest could sustain, their bark pale as birchwood or deep, and rich as ancient oak, depending on where you walk. Their canopies so high above that the sky visible between the branches appears as scattered fragments of perpetual dusk. The light here carries that quality of late evening gold, that warm amber that makes everything it touches look sacred. Elven tradition describes this as an eternal quality. The light always hovering in this specific place between day and night, never burning to full noon and never deepening to full dark. Whether this is literally true in any cosmological sense, or whether it is the way elves experience the quality of Arborea's divine warmth as it filters through Corallin's love for his people, the effect is the same. The illumination of Arvandor is gentle and diffuse, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, as though the sky itself is a source of soft radiance rather than a dome above which something burns. The trees filter it. The rivers carry it. Even the moss upon ancient stones seems to generate its own cool luminescence in the quieter hours. Tiny points of blue-green light that mark the paths between the groves, like a quiet, patient guide. And there are streams here, silver, clear, impossibly cold streams that wind between the roots of the great trees and whisper as they move. To cup this water in your hands and drink is to taste something that has no equivalent in the mortal world. There is a word that some scholars of the plains have attempted to use, a word for that sensation of perfect clarity, combined with deep melancholy, combined with profound peace. But no single word in the common tongue quite reaches it. The Elven language comes closer. Elven has a concept for the feeling of experiencing something beautiful while also knowing it cannot last. A bittersweet ache that most mortal languages gesture toward, but never fully hold. But here in Arvandor, that feeling is inverted. Here the beauty lasts. Here the twilight never deepens into full dark and never burns into full noon. It stays exactly where it is. And the feeling that produces is so overwhelming that visitors to the plain, mortals who have somehow made the crossing into Arborea, often report simply sitting down beside one of those silver streams and losing track of everything they intended to do. Hours pass, sometimes days, and they cannot bring themselves to feel troubled by it. This is not accidental. This is the nature of the place. Arvandor invites stillness. It invites the kind of presence that has been washed clean of urgency. In a cosmos full of plains that demand something from those who walk them, plains that test and punish and challenge and break, Arvandor asks only that you be here, fully here, nothing more. The Seldarine, the family of elven gods who call this place home, did not build Arvandor in any conventional sense. Plains of this nature do not get built the way a house gets built. They emerge. They grow. They become what the divine will within them makes them, slowly, over stretches of time so vast that the word slowly loses most of its meaning. Arvandor has been shaping itself around the Seldarine for longer than most mortal civilizations have existed, longer than most mortal gods have been worshipped, longer, perhaps, than most of the material plane has been inhabited at all. The plane remembers things. It holds the echoes of prayers spoken in languages that no living creature still speaks. It holds the memory of the first elven souls who crossed over after death and walked these silver shores for the very first time. It holds everything, the way an old library holds books, not just the words written in them, but the warmth of every hand that ever turned a page. The chief among the Seldarine, the one whose will shapes Arvandor most deeply, is Corellin Larethian. His name is spoken with a kind of reverence that borders on the physical in elven cultures. He is not simply a god among gods. He is, in the most literal sense available in elven theology, the origin, the first cause, the moment from which all elven existence radiates outward. Among the many traditions the elves carry regarding their own creation, the most widely held tells that when the gods were shaping the mortal races in the early ages of the world. Corellin did not craft the elves from clay or stone or fire, the way other creator gods shaped their peoples. The elves came from Corellin's own blood, from the wounds he sustained in divine battle, from something fundamental and vital that poured out of him and took shape upon the world below. There are other traditions too. Some say the first elves emerged from Corellin's tears, shed in 3 qualities of grief and joy, and laughter during the long ages before the elven people scattered across the mortal world. What binds all of these traditions together, and what the elves treat not as competing myths, but as complementary truths, is that in every version, the elves did not simply come from a god. They came from inside one, from something that was, before the making, part of Corellin himself. To be an elf, in elven understanding, is to carry a piece of Corellin within you. Not metaphorically, literally. His essence is threaded into the elven form, into the elven spirit, into the particular grace that elves carry, and the longevity that stretches their lives into something that begins to approach the scale of geological time. When an elf enters the reverie and brushes against Arvandor in that liminal space between memory and return, they are in some sense brushing against Corellin himself, against the source of what they are. And when an elf dies, when their long life finally comes to its end, whether through violence or illness, or the simple turning of uncountable years, their soul finds its way to Arvandor through something that functions less like a journey and more like a return, less like arriving somewhere new and more like water finding its way back to the sea. This relationship between Corellin and the elven people is the central spiritual reality of Arvandor. It is the reason the plane feels the way it does. That aching, gorgeous quality of recognition that settles over every visitor who enters with an open heart. You are not a stranger in Arvandor, even if you are not an elf, even if you arrived by means of a planar portal or a wizard's spell. There is something in this place that adjusts itself around your presence with a kind of gracious welcome that feels ancient and considered. The forest here has been welcoming those who come in peace for so long that it has made hospitality into something structural, something woven into the air itself. For elven souls, of course, the experience goes far deeper. The trees know you. The streams hold the echo of your voice. The light bends toward you not because it is greeting a stranger, but because it is welcoming back something it has always held a place for. The way a family keeps a candle lit in the window, not out of uncertainty about whether you will return, but out of love, pure and patient, and undiminished by time. Arvandor exists on the first layer of Arborea, a great plain sometimes called the Olympian Glades by those who study the outer cosmology without specific reference to any one pantheon's traditions. Arborea as a whole is a plane of extremes held in beautiful tension. It is a place of passion and wildness, of joy so intense it aches, and sorrow so vivid it becomes its own form of beauty. The plane rewards those who feel deeply and move freely. It has little patience for the cold, the calculating, the rigidly lawful. But within Arborea, Arvandor is its own specific quality, its own atmosphere, where the rest of Arborea can feel wild and untamed. Arvandor carries a sense of cultivated grace, of nature held in perfect relationship with art. The ancient trees here do not grow entirely at random. They grow in patterns that suggest long centuries of elven attention, of hands that planted and tended and loved without ever seeking to fully control. The streams run where they will, but they run between banks that have been tended by the divine. It is the difference between wilderness and sanctuary, and Arvandor has always been a sanctuary. There is also something else worth understanding about the geography of this place, something that takes some time to fully feel as you move through it. Arvandor is not a finite space in the way a city or a forest on the material plane is finite. It does not have edges you can reach by walking long enough. The plane seems to expand around whoever is within it, offering more forest, more glades, more streams, more quiet alcoves beneath ancient roots. This is a feature of divine domains across the outer planes, that quality of spatial generosity that reflects the infinite nature of the divine, will that shapes them. But in Arvandor, it carries a particular emotional weight. The plane is large enough to hold every elven soul that has ever lived and will ever live. It has always been large enough. It will always be large enough. And that fact alone, that quiet, architectural promise of enough, is something that elven souls feel upon arrival the way you feel warmth after a long time in the cold. In the sections ahead, we will walk deeper into this place together. We will spend time with each member of the Seldarine, those gods and goddesses who have given Arvandor its many faces and voices. We will trace the long road that elven souls travel from the moment of death to the moment they feel the silver grass of this eternal glade beneath them for the first time. We will find the sacred places hidden within the plane itself, the groves and courts and rivers and towers that hold the accumulated meaning of elven existence across countless thousands of years. And we will follow the thread that connects Arvandor back to the mortal world, to Faerun, to the great elven cities that rose and fell and rose again, and to the quiet, aching question that hovers over all of elven lore, like the perpetual golden dusk of this place. What does it mean to be an ancient people in a world that changes faster than you do? What does it mean to carry eternity inside you while everything around you turns to dust? The answers, or something close to them, live here. in the light between the trees, in the sound of silver water moving gently over ancient stones, in the long, patient golden hour that never ends. Section 2. The Seldarine and their courts. The name the elves use for their pantheon tells you everything you need to know before any story is told. Tel Seldarine, the fellowship of brothers and sisters of the wood, not the council, not the hierarchy, not the divine parliament. The fellowship. There is something deliberately intimate in that word, something that insists these gods are not distant administrators of elven fate, governing from cold stone thrones behind closed golden doors. They are family. They are the companions who walked through the same ancient forest, who bled in the same battles, who shaped the same children from their own divine essence, and then watched those children scatter across the mortal world to live brief, luminous lives. The Seldarine are not gods who demand worship from above. They are gods who remember. And in Arvandor, that memory is present in every blade of silver grass, every current of the ever-gentle wind, every beam of amber light that falls without pause or interruption through the canopy of the oldest trees in all of creation. Corellin stands at the center of all of it, not metaphorically, not as a title given to the most powerful among equals, but in the truest and most literal sense. He is the axis around which the Seldarine turn. His nature is not what mortals who have studied only human or dwarven pantheons might expect from a chief deity. He is not thunderous. He is not stern. He does not rule through fear or demand absolute obedience from his divine siblings. The word that elven theologians reach for most often when attempting to describe Corellin is grace. A word that does a great deal of work across several different meanings at once. Grace as in elegance, in the kind of effortless beauty that is not performed but simply present. Grace as in mercy, in the willingness to extend compassion where judgment would also have been fair. Grace as in something granted freely, something not earned, but given as an expression of a nature that cannot help but pour itself outward into the world. He carries a sword called Sahandrian. Elven tradition describes it as a blade unlike anything that can be forged in any mortal smithy. Its light neither warm nor cold, but something between the two. Something that feels exactly like the quality of illumination that fills Arvandor at every moment. Whether the older stories that describe it as drawn from a stellar source are speaking in divine metaphor or in cosmological fact, is something elven scholars have debated across centuries without resolution. What the traditions agree on is that the blade is an extension of Corellin himself, that the light it carries and the light of Arvandor share the same essential nature, and that when it is raised in defense of the elven people, it carries not just its wielder's will, but the full warmth of the divine home at his back. Within Arvandor, Corallin's seat is located within what is called the Crescent Grove, a great palace-like complex built into and around the living forest itself, rather than imposed upon it. Unlike the cold stone structures that human kings tend to favor, the Crescent Grove is architecture in conversation with nature. Its walls formed partly from living wood and pale stone, its floors carpeted by living moss, its open spaces framed by trees whose root systems form natural colonnades of extraordinary grandeur. This is where Corallin receives those who come seeking him, not from behind a formal throne, but with the ease of someone who has never needed grandeur to establish presence. Elven souls who make their way to the Crescent Grove often report simply standing at its edge and feeling the weight of several lifetimes lift from their shoulders in a single breath. Seldarine Moonbow is the most powerful female deity among the Seldarine in the older traditions, and her presence in Arvandor carries a different quality than Corallin's warmth. She governs the full moon, that bright and silver disk that is the sky's most watchful eye. She governs dreams and the mysteries that live between sleeping and waking. She governs the elven understanding of death, the passage that each soul undertakes between the end of mortal life and arrival upon the silver shores of this plane. And she governs transcendence, that concept that sits at the far edge of all those other ideas, the movement beyond the known into something too large for any single mind to hold. Seldarine is described in Elven tradition as ephemeral, which is a strange way to describe a goddess, and yet it is exactly right. She does not resolve into clarity the way Corallin does. She remains always slightly out of focus, always wrapped in something that the eye cannot quite pierce, as though the full truth of her is always just a little further than your gaze can reach. Her symbols within Arvandor are the silver light that gathers on the streams in the deepest hours of this eternal twilight, the mist that rises from the ground in certain groves, and the points of faint light that appear in the canopy above when the ambient glow of the plane shifts slightly toward the cooler end of its range. She communicates through visions and dreams and omens, rarely through direct speech, and she is said to watch over the reverie of every elf alive, standing guard over that liminal space between consciousness and deep memory. It is Seldarine who guides elven souls home after death. This is one of her most important functions, and it is one that the elves feel most personally, because every elf who has lost someone they love carries the knowledge that Seldarine was there at the end, that the transition was not made alone, that the soul of that parent, that sibling, that centuries-long companion who finally came to their end, was met somewhere in the crossing and accompanied the rest of the way to the silver shores. Now there is a figure in the Seldarine that many accounts pass over too quickly, one that becomes impossible to understand if you skip it. Her name is Angharad, and she is not simply another goddess standing alongside the others. She is three goddesses in one, following the great betrayal that shook the Seldarine to their foundations, which we will come to shortly. Sehanine Moonbow, Airdrie Fenia, and Hanali Selanil merged themselves into a single divine entity, not through force or through loss, through choice, through the understanding that what the Seldarine had just endured required a new kind of strength in response, something unified and deliberate. Angharad became the second most powerful deity in the entire Elven pantheon, sitting beside Corellin as a paired divine authority. She carries within her the domains of all three goddesses she comprises: the moon and dreams, the sky and freedom, and the heart and beauty, all held together in a form that is both singular and multiple simultaneously. When Corellin speaks in the councils of the Seldarine, it is Angharad who sits beside him. When the fate of the Elven people requires two voices rather than one, those are the two voices. This is worth sitting with, because it tells you something essential about how the Seldarine process catastrophe. They do not simply endure it. They transform in response to it. They become more than they were before, not despite the wound, but through the work of answering it. Hanali Selanil, in her individual form before, and alongside her contribution to Angharad, brings the warmth of love and beauty to the pantheon. Her domain within Arvandor centers on a spring called Evergold, a fountain of water so clear and still that it serves as a kind of living mirror. Hanali is said to sit beside it, watching its surface, which she uses to see the hearts of all who worship her across the mortal world. When she reaches out to her faithful, it is rarely through grand gestures. It is through small, exact moments, the way a specific quality of afternoon light makes you suddenly aware of someone, the way a song you have heard 100 times suddenly sounds new in a particular moment of your life. Love, in Hanali's theology, is not something that happens to you from the outside. It is something that has always been inside you, and Hanali simply tends the conditions that allow it to grow toward the surface. She is all warmth and no sharp edge, and the mild vanity that Elven myths sometimes attribute to her. As a flaw is so gentle, it functions more like charm than shortcoming. When she walks through Arvandor, the flowers along the path turn toward her, not because they must, but because they cannot help it. Airdrie Fenia carries the sky within her. She is the goddess of wind and weather and birds, the divine patron of the Averial, those winged elves who once soared above the peaks of the highest mountain ranges on Faerun before history and time reduced their numbers to near nothing. Airdrie herself is described as having great feathered wings and a face that changes expression with the same speed and unpredictability as weather itself. She is joyful and wild, where Seldarine is measured and still. She brings the rain that feeds the sacred forests of Arvandor. She is the breath in the wind that moves through the branches, and her laughter, when it comes, sounds like the specific music of air rushing through a high mountain pass. Her portion of Arvandor stretches upward into the sky above the canopy, that vast amber expanse through which great birds glide in long, unhurried arcs, their wingspans wide enough to cast shadows across whole groves below. Labla's Enerith is the philosopher among the Seldarine. He governs time and longevity, and the long memory that makes Elven civilization so different from the fleeting, urgent civilizations of shorter-lived peoples. He is old in a way that reads differently from the way other ancient beings carry their age. He carries it with a kind of settled peace, as though he has long since made his agreement with the passage of all things, and found in that agreement not resignation, but freedom. He is the patron of those elves who have lived long enough that their perspective has shifted from the personal to the historical, who begin to see their own lives not as the center of a story, but as one thread among many, beautiful precisely because of how it weaves with all the others. His presence in Arvandor lends the plane a quality of intellectual depth, a sense that even here, even in this place of rest, the mind is not required to go still. Thought and contemplation are their own form of devotion, and Lablas honors that without qualification. Rilifane Ralathil is the wild green heart of the Seldarine. He governs nature, the deep forest, and the bond between the elves and the living world they inhabit on the material plane. His form in divine artwork is often that of an enormous oak, broader and older than any tree that grows on the mortal world. And when he manifests in more humanoid form, he is still draped in bark and moss and moving leaves. The natural world wearing a person-shaped container for the time it takes to speak with someone face to face. He is calm, tremendously calm, with the patience of root systems that have been growing in the same direction for centuries. His part of Arvandor is the wildest and most overgrown, the section where the ancient forest truly becomes ancient, where the trees have no spaces between them, and the light filters down through so many layers of canopy that by the time it reaches the forest floor, it has become something soft and green and sacred. Seldarine the Landira stands at the boundary. He is the god of hunting and archery and the deep wilderness. The tradition is specific about what kind of boundary he watches. The threshold where the cultivated and the untamed face each other across a line that is never fully fixed. He belongs to both sides of it simultaneously. He knows the wilderness with the intimacy of something that lives within it. He knows the settlements of his people with the protective love of something that guards them from the outside. His arrows are described as silver-tipped and unerring, and he is among the most directly martial members of the Seldarine. The divine figure an elf invokes when they notch an arrow in defense of something they love. Elven is the laughter in the back of the room. He is the trickster god, the unpredictable one, the deity of mischief and change, who keeps the rest of the Seldarine from ever becoming too settled in their ways. His pranks and tricks are not designed to harm, but to reveal, to catch someone so fixed in their assumptions that they need a good surprise to remind them the world is larger than they have been allowing themselves to believe. He is mercurial and quick and genuinely funny, which is a thing that does not get said enough about gods. In Arvandor, he moves through every part of the plane without settling in any one place for long, which seems exactly right. And then there is the wound, the great sorrow that shaped the Seldarine into what they are today, that runs underneath all the beauty of Arvandor like a dark current beneath bright water, never visible from above, but always present, always moving. Her name before the fall was Arishne. She was a lesser elven goddess of destiny and artisans, and she was Corallin's consort in the early age of the Seldarine's formation. The traditions describe her as brilliant and beautiful and deeply, terribly ambitious. She loved Corallin, or some part of her did, but another part looked at what he was and what she was, and found the distance between those two things unbearable. Not through any cruelty on his part, but there was a thing she wanted that could not be given, only seized, and the wanting of it grew inside her until it was larger than everything else. Arishne built a conspiracy. She worked carefully and over a long stretch of time, weaving alliances with hostile divine powers, constructing an assault on Corallin from multiple directions at once. In the chaos of the great battle she helped engineer, her treachery was revealed. The sources vary in their account of exactly how, but what they agree on is that the full scope of her betrayal was exposed before the assembled Seldarine, and that Corallin, standing above the one who had shared his divine home, understood everything. What followed was a reckoning rather than a swift punishment. Arishne was tried by the Seldarine. The judgment against her was total. She was declared a demon and expelled from Arvandor, cast down into the abyss along with her son Viheron, who had participated in the betrayal knowingly. Her daughter Elistrae was a different matter entirely. She had not plotted against the Seldarine. She had been used without her knowledge, made an instrument of her mother's design, and the guilt she carried for that was entirely unearned. But the traditions tell us that Elistrae chose her exile herself. She chose to follow her mother into the dark, not out of loyalty to Arishne's cause, but out of compassion for the dark elves, who would follow Arishne downward into the abyss. and who would need someone to carry a light into those depths for them. She went willingly. She went with Coraline's sorrow at her back and the full understanding of everything she was giving up. And she carried the warmth of the Seldarine into the darkest places in the cosmos as a deliberate act of love for a people she would not abandon. Arashni remade and ascended, became lulled. And the wound of that transformation is woven into the very soil of Arvandor. The silver streams run a little cooler in certain places. The perpetual twilight carries on certain evenings when the light shifts toward the edge of purple, a quality of ancient morning that even new souls feel upon arriving, without knowing what they are feeling or why. The elves on the mortal world carry it too, that deep-coded awareness that their pantheon was once broken open from the inside, that something born among them chose a path that led to darkness, and that the consequences of that choice have stretched across all of Elven history like a scar across the face of the world. And yet Arvandor endures. The Seldarine, diminished by the loss and transformed by it, answered that transformation with one of their own. 3 goddesses merged into one. A family reshaped itself around a wound and became stronger at the broken place. They held the plane together. They continued to receive their people. They continued to walk among the silver streams and the ancient trees, governing and watching and loving with the patience of beings for whom time means something entirely different than it does for the mortals they protect. The wound did not break the family. It changed it. And there is a difference. Section 3, The Long Road Home. Every elf who has ever lived on the material plane carries within them a relationship with death that no other mortal race quite shares. Not because elves are fearless of dying. That is a misunderstanding that shorter-lived peoples sometimes develop when they observe Elven culture from the outside, interpreting the elf's long view of time as a kind of detachment from mortality. Elves are not detached. If anything, they feel loss more acutely than any other race, because they have more time to accumulate the people and places and moments that loss can take from them. An elf who has lived 400 years has loved people who lived and died within a single century. They have watched cities rise and fall. They have held in their arms companions who were vital and irreplaceable, and then watched those companions become memory. Elves do not face death with calm because they do not feel its weight. They carry a different relationship with it because they understand, at a level embedded so deep it is almost cellular, exactly where death leads. It leads here, to the silver grass, to the amber light in the ancient canopy, to the sound of water moving over stones. It leads to Arvandor, and the elves have known this since the first of them drew breath on the mortal world. The process begins long before the actual moment of death. It begins in the reverie, that meditative state that elves enter each day in place of sleep. Humans dream, and in their dreams, they visit places that never existed, encounter people assembled from fragments of memory, experience narratives that follow no reliable logic and dissolve upon waking. Elves do not do this. When an elf enters the reverie, they return. They go back to specific, real moments in their past and experience them again with perfect fidelity. The conversation they had 300 years ago with a mentor they loved. The morning they stood at the edge of a particular cliff and watched the sun rise over a valley that no longer exists. The night they made a choice that changed the direction of their life. These moments are not reconstructed from imperfect recall. They are accessed, stored somewhere within the elven spirit, with a precision that defies the usual decay of mortal memory. What this means in practical terms is that an elf's inner life is not primarily oriented toward the present or the future the way a human's is. An elf lives in dialogue between what is happening now and what has already happened, between the living moment and the vast accumulated weight of all the living moments that came before it. This is why elves can seem unhurried, even when urgency would be warranted. It is not indifference. It is perspective. When you carry every moment of your past within you in perfect detail, the present moment is already preparing to take its place in that collection. And the knowledge of that future preservation changes the quality of how you experience it now. And at the edges of the reverie, in the transitional space between reliving memory and returning to wakefulness, there is something else. Something that does not belong to any individual elf's personal history. A warmth, a quality of light that is familiar without being identifiable. A sound of water that carries a specific emotional resonance for which there is no name in any mortal language. Most elves experience this at least a handful of times across their long lives. Some experience it regularly. A very few elves, those who are deeply spiritually attuned, walk the borderlands of this space with enough awareness to begin to understand what it is. To recognize Arvandor not as an abstract theological concept, a destination promised in prayer and scripture, but as an actual place they are already touching, however faintly, from the other side of a veil that is thinner than most mortals imagine. When the moment of death finally comes, Elven tradition describes the veil dissolving rather than breaking. This is the important distinction. For other mortal souls, death is often described as a rupture, a violent or at least abrupt separation of spirit from body, a crossing that requires an effort that cannot be avoided. For elves, the crossing is a deepening. They have been touching the edge of Arvandor every day of their long lives. When the body finally releases them, they do not leap across a gap. They slide gradually and without resistance through the veil they have been pressing against from the other side for centuries. The theologians who study this have sometimes described it as the difference between a door opening and a wall dissolving. Both get you to the same place, but one is a discontinuous moment of passage, and the other is a slow, continuous revelation of what was always there. Based on what we understand of the reverie's nature and its relationship to the plane, we can reasonably infer that the reverie itself functions as a kind of daily preparation for this crossing, a rehearsal so gradual and so continuous that when the final moment comes, the soul already knows the way. Seldarine Moonbow governs this crossing. She is present at every elven death, not in a way that is visible or dramatic, but in the way that the quality of light at a threshold changes as you move through it. She does not announce herself. She does not appear in a shower of silver light to escort the newly dead with ceremony. She is simply there, in the quality of the air, in the warmth that gathers around the departing soul, in the sense of unhurried welcome that greets the spirit as it begins to understand where it is going. She ensures that no elf travels this road alone. She ensures that no elf is lost. In elven funeral prayers, there is a phrase that appears across dozens of different regional traditions, worded differently each time, but carrying the same meaning. The moon is already watching. It is addressed to the grief of those left behind, a reassurance that before the mourners even thought to be afraid for the soul they loved, Seldarine had already turned her attention toward it. The journey itself, for most elven souls, is experienced as a return to the reverie. The newly dead find themselves in that familiar meditative state, reliving memories in perfect detail, moving through the great library of their own life. But this time, something is different. The memories do not feel like a collection to be accessed and revisited at will. They feel like a path. Each one leads naturally to the next, not in the order they were originally lived, but in an order that makes a different kind of sense, a thematic sense, a sense of gathering. All the moments of beauty together, all the moments of love together, all the moments of grief and loss, held gently in a sequence that allows them to be felt without being crushed beneath. The soul moves through this ordered recollection of its own life and experiences something that the living rarely have access to, a complete view of what the life was. Not a judgment of it, not a verdict rendered by some divine authority from above. Simply the whole thing visible at once, every thread of it illuminated. And at the end of that long walk through memory, Arvandor opens. There is no gate that swings. There is no official crossing point marked by architecture or guardian. The forest simply begins to be present around you, and the memories that were the path become the light in the canopy above, and the quality of the air shifts to that warm amber quality that the living who have visited the plain remember so vividly. And the silver grass is beneath your feet, and the sound of water is somewhere close, and you are home. The elven souls who arrive in Arvandor are called petitioners within the planar cosmology. They do not submit applications or wait in queues or undergo formal judgment. They arrive in a place that was built for them and finds them exactly as they are. An elf who was a warrior in life does not suddenly find that her identity has been subtracted. An elf who was a scholar retains his curiosity and his love of language. An elf who spent 4 centuries as a gardener finds that the gardens of Arvandor respond to their hands with the same specificity and joy as any garden they tended in mortal life. What is subtracted gradually and gently over the early period of adjustment is the weight, the exhaustion, the accumulation of regret and loss, and the bruising that a very long life inevitably acquires even in the best circumstances. That does not go all at once. It goes the way a heavy garment is removed on a warm day, slowly at first, then with increasing ease, until you suddenly realize you are standing in nothing but light, and wondering how long you had forgotten what that felt like. The forests of Arvandor are full of these souls. They walk between the ancient trees. They sit beside the silver streams. They work at crafts and arts that occupied them in life. Here, with no deadline and no commercial necessity, and no judgment beyond the quiet satisfaction of making something beautiful, because beauty is worth making. They speak with each other and with new arrivals, and sometimes with the Seldarine themselves, who move through this same forest without ceremony or barrier. The division between the divine and the mortal dead in Arvandor is not a wall. It is more like the difference between a very old tree and a younger one. Both grow in the same soil. Both reach toward the same light. The older one has simply been here longer. Now here is where the theological picture becomes layered in a way that rewards careful attention. Arvandor is described in the traditions not simply as an eternal resting place, but as a place of active spiritual movement. The Elven concept of transcendence, governed by Seldarine herself, suggests that the soul's time in Arvandor is not a permanent static condition, but a phase, a period of rest and restoration that eventually gives way to something further along. What exactly that something is becomes a place where canon and interpretation begin to sit in close company. What we can say with confidence is that the Elven afterlife traditions consistently describe the soul's journey as continuing beyond the initial arrival in Arvandor. Some accounts suggest that souls who have rested fully in the plane may eventually reincarnate, returning to the mortal world in new elven forms carrying no conscious memory of prior lives, but shaped in subtle ways by everything they were. This could imply that the long elven lifespan and the depth of the reverie are themselves the accumulated result of many such cycles, each one pressing deeper into the divine essence that Corellin poured into the first elves at the beginning of all things. Other traditions within Elven theology describe a more complete union, what some texts call becoming one with the Seldarine, a final dissolution of the individual soul back into the divine collective, from which Elven existence originally came. Based on the internal logic of Elven creation theology, this reading makes a certain deep sense. If the elves were made from Corellin's own essence, then the soul's ultimate arc would be a return to that essence, carrying back everything the individual life gathered and experienced, enriching the divine source the way a river enriches the sea it flows into. The traditions are not unanimous on this point, and it would be too strong to state it as settled doctrine. But the weight of Elven spiritual practice, the orientation of the reverie, the emphasis on Sehenine's domain of transcendence, and the way Elven funeral rites speak of the dead as returning rather than departing, all point in the same direction. Something more than simple rest is offered here, something that the individual self moves toward when it is ready, on no schedule but its own. There are elves who resist this movement, who love what they are individually too much, or carry something they cannot bear to release, or who arrived in Arvandor still unresolved, still reaching back toward the mortal world for reasons the plane holds without judgment. Some of these souls linger in Arvandor for ages. The forest holds them without pressure. The Seldarine do not force the transition. The streams run past them the same as anyone else. The light falls on them with the same warmth. The forest simply continues to be the forest, and eventually, always, the resistance softens. Corellin does not compel his people toward any spiritual destination before they are ready. This is consistent across every account of his nature and every account of Arvandor's character. The plane he made and the pantheon he leads both operate according to the same fundamental principle: love extended without condition and without deadline. Come when you are ready. Rest as long as you need. The next step will be there when you turn toward it. And this is where Elven mourning rituals make their deepest sense. When an elf grieves for one who has died, they do not light candles against the darkness the way human traditions often do, pushing back against the night as though it is an enemy. Elven mourning rituals open windows. They set out bowls of water from local streams, gesturing toward the rivers of Arvandor. They sing songs that are not laments, but guided farewells, melodies that are meant not to call the dead back, but to smooth the path forward, to offer the departing soul a thread of familiar beauty to follow into the crossing. The grief is real and is not minimized, but it is held within a framework that understands the soul's destination. And that understanding gives elven grief a quality of peace at its center, even when the surface of it is shaking. To grieve an elf is to miss someone who has gone somewhere real, somewhere specific, somewhere that the reverie brushes against every single day. And in the deep quiet of that daily meditation, in that liminal warmth at the edge of memory and return, the boundary between mourner and mourned grows thinner than it has any right to be. Not thin enough to cross, but thin enough to feel. And sometimes, in the most still and most open moments of the reverie, something moves on the other side of it. Something that carries a familiar warmth. Something that cannot speak clearly through the veil, but presses forward anyway, the way light presses through cloth. The elves have a word for that too. Of course they do. They have had longer than most to find the right one. Section 4. Sacred places within the eternal forest. The geography of Arvandor does not submit to maps. Those who have attempted to chart it, planar cartographers and adventurous scholars who made the crossing into Arborea with quill and parchment in hand, have returned with drawings that contradict each other in fundamental ways. The distance between two specific groves is recorded differently in every account. The great river at the plain's heart appears to change course between one visitor's journey and the next. The Crescent Grove, Corallin's own dwelling at the center of the plain, seems to occupy a different position relative to the forest's edge, depending on who is seeking it and why. The plain is not deceptive. It is not trying to confuse those who enter it with honest curiosity. It simply organizes itself according to a logic that is not geographical. It organizes itself according to need. You find in Arvandor what you are ready to find, when you are ready to find it, and the distance between you and whatever that is adjusts itself accordingly. This is important to understand before you try to speak about any specific place within the plain, because to name a location in Arvandor and describe its features is always also to describe the state of being that leads a soul there. The sacred places of this plain are not simply coordinates. They are destinations that earn themselves through the quality of attention brought to the journey. With that understood, let us walk. The first place that most newly arrived souls encounter, often before they have fully understood that they have arrived at all, is the edge of a vast stretch of forest called the Wandering Wood. This is the outermost region of Arvandor, the part of the plain closest to whatever serves as an entry, though entry is too architectural a word for what the crossing actually is. The Wandering Wood is old even by the standards of this ageless place. The trees here are enormous and diverse, spanning species that no single climate on the mortal world could sustain together. Oaks with roots that have been growing for uncountable ages stand alongside pale aspens and ancient cedars and trees that have no name in any mortal tongue, because nothing like them grows in any mortal forest. They share the soil without competition, their root systems having long since negotiated a relationship of mutual support, so elaborate that from above, seen in the way a god might see it, those roots form a pattern like writing in a language that predates all spoken languages. The wandering wood is where elven souls tend to spend the earliest and most tentative part of their time in Arvandor. There is no formal designation that marks it as a place of arrival. No signage, no waiting or processing of any kind. But the forest has its own wisdom about what a newly arrived soul needs. And what it consistently provides in this outer region is privacy, softness, and the gentle, non-demanding beauty of old trees. The light here is particularly warm. The paths between the trunks are wide enough to walk without difficulty, but intimate enough to feel held. There are clearings scattered throughout where the canopy opens, and the amber sky above is visible in full, wide stretches of that rose-gold perpetual evening that seems to breathe slowly, like something alive and at peace. New souls wandering these paths often find companions, other elven souls who arrived a little earlier and have oriented themselves enough to offer a welcoming presence to those who are still in the initial state of adjustment. This happens without any formal organization. Nobody assigns anyone to welcome duty. The forest simply has the quality of making it natural for those who feel steady to reach toward those who are still finding their footing. And the result is that no arriving soul remains alone for long. This could imply that the wandering wood functions as something more than a geographical region. It may be that the plain itself shapes this outer forest deliberately, tending it the way a good host tends an entry room, ensuring that what greets you first is the very best expression of warmth and ease the space has to offer. Deeper into the plain, past the wandering wood, and into the ancient interior of Arvandor, you begin to encounter the great silver flow. This river is the circulatory system of the plain, the living current that connects every sacred place to every other sacred place, winding through the roots of the oldest trees in long, unhurried loops that follow no geographically predictable path. The silver flow runs cold and clear, its bed visible through the water with a crystalline precision that makes every stone on the riverbed appear sharply present, each one distinct and specific. And the quality of its water, when you drink from it, or simply place your hands in its current, produces something that the languages of the mortal world can only gesture toward. A clarity, a sudden completeness, the sensation of a question you have been carrying for a very long time being gently lifted out of your hands and held up to the light, and found to have an answer that was always there, that you simply needed the right quality of stillness to receive. Scholars of planar geography who have approached the silver flow with academic intention have noted that the river does not behave the way mortal rivers do. Its current does not follow gravity consistently. It moves in directions that require no explanation of elevation or landscape to justify, running uphill in certain sections without appearing to notice, pooling in places where no depression in the earth exists to hold it, disappearing underground in one location and emerging several leagues away with no detectable subterranean passage between the 2 points. Based on what we understand of how divine domains organize themselves around the nature of their inhabiting deity, this could mean the silver flow is not a river in the geological sense at all. It may be closer to a thought, an intention given liquid form, moving not according to the laws of the physical world, but according to a will that expresses itself through water, because water is what best carries its particular quality of presence. There are places along the silver flow where the river widens into slow, calm stretches that approach the stillness of a lake. In these places, the water's surface becomes reflective, holding the amber sky above in a mirror so clear, it is sometimes difficult to tell which direction is up when you stand at the bank. Elven souls come to these wide, still sections when they are carrying something heavy, when the early period of adjustment in the wandering wood has given them enough stability to begin the deeper work of processing what their long life contained. And they seat themselves on the roots of the trees that overhang the water, and let the silence do what silence in Arvandor is uniquely equipped to do. There is no therapy here, no divine counselor who appears to walk them through their grief in structured sessions. There is only the water and the trees and the amber light, and the extraordinarily patient quality of a place that has been holding space for 10,000 years and has no particular investment in hurrying anything to its conclusion. The crescent grove sits at the true heart of Arvandor. This is Corallin's dwelling, his seat within the divine home, and its character reflects everything that is central to his nature. It is not a palace in the sense that any mortal architect would recognize. It is a complex of open structures built in deep conversation with the living forest. Walls formed from pale stone and living wood that have grown together over the ages into something neither purely constructed nor purely natural. Its boundaries soft and permeable, its interior spaces opening into the forest, and then gathering themselves back into enclosure without any sharp line between inside and outside. Enormous trees grow through the center of its primary spaces, their canopies forming the only ceiling that certain areas of the grove possess. Moss carpets every stone floor with a consistent soft luminescence. What the crescent grove communicates above all else is the specific quality of Coralline's divine attention. You do not feel, standing within it, that you are in the home of a ruler. You feel that you are in the home of someone who loves the same things you love. Someone who has arranged their space around those loves without performing anything for any audience. The books and instruments of war and craft and art that occupy the grove's shelves and alcoves are not displayed. They are present the way a beloved object is present in a lived-in space, because they belong there, because they are used, because the person who keeps them near cannot imagine the space without them. Elven souls who find their way to the Crescent Grove often report the same experience, a settling that happens somewhere beneath conscious thought, a recognition so deep it has no words, only the quiet certainty of a thing that has always been true becoming suddenly, completely legible. Coralline receives those who come to him here without ceremony. He does not sit elevated. He does not require formal address or ritual gesture. The elven tradition that describes him in these encounters consistently emphasizes the quality of his presence as full and unhurried, the attention of someone who is entirely here, entirely with you, entirely unoccupied by anything else in the cosmos for the duration of the encounter. Given that he is simultaneously a god whose awareness extends across every elven prayer and every elven life on the mortal world, this quality of focused presence is itself a kind of miracle, and the elves treat it as one. Hanali Selenil's Evergold Fountain occupies a grove not far from the Crescent Grove, surrounded by flowering trees that bloom in colors not found in the mortal world's spectrum of light. Warm pinks that tip into something like rose gold and purples that carry a quality of depth, making them appear to glow from within. The fountain itself is modest in size, no wider than a few arm spans, but the water in it moves in slow, perfect circles without any visible source of current, as though the water is engaged in a kind of gentle, perpetual dance with itself. Evergold is one of the most specifically canonical sacred sites within Arvandor, mentioned across multiple theological traditions as the place where Hanali does her most careful work. She watches the fountain's surface to see the hearts of those who call on her, not to judge them, but to understand exactly what they need, and to provide it in the quiet way she prefers. Elven souls who come to Evergold seeking something they lost in mortal life, a love that ended before it should have, a relationship broken by war or distance, or the cruelty of time, find the fountain a place of extraordinary stillness. They do not receive speeches or pronouncements from Hanali. They simply sit beside the water and feel, and the quality of feeling in this specific place has a clarifying effect that operates below the threshold of thought, gently resolving what was tangled into something that can be held without pain. Whether this is strictly a magical property of the fountain itself, or whether it is Hanali's divine attention expressed through the water, is a distinction that may not ultimately matter. The result is the same. You come to Evergold carrying something that has been hurting you for a long time, and you leave carrying the same thing differently. Above the canopy of the entire plain, in the vast amber sky that crowns Arvandor from above, Airdrie Fenia's domain opens into something that feels entirely its own despite being part of the same plane. The transition from the deep forest below to this open aerial expanse is one of the great threshold experiences of Arvandor. You pass through the highest branches of the oldest trees, those impossible heights where the canopy begins to thin and the sky becomes more present than the wood. And then you are in open air, cold and brilliant, with the entirety of the forest spread below you in a carpet of amber and green, so vast it has no visible edge. The light up here is different from the forest light below. It is clearer, less filtered. The amber quality of the plane's illumination present in full, rather than softened and scattered by 10,000 layers of leaf. Great birds fly here. This is perhaps too small a word for what they are. These are birds the size of sailing ships, their wingspans wide enough to cast shadows across entire groves far below. Their feathers carrying the specific warm color of the plane's light in a way that makes them appear to be made partly of the air itself. They fly in long, unhurried arcs, never appearing to exert any effort, as though the air up here is simply delighted to hold them, and does so without requiring anything in return. Averial souls who arrive in Arvandor find their wings in this space if they were lost in mortal life, restored to full perfection and full function. And the traditions that describe the first flight of an Averial soul in Airdrie's sky are among the most joyful passages in all of Elven theological literature. It is not described as a return to something that was taken. It is described as a completion, as though the Averial spent their entire mortal life slightly less than what they were supposed to be. And the sky of Arvandor is where the missing piece is finally, fully given back. Rillifain Ralathil's portion of the plain is the deepest and oldest section of the Wandering Wood, pushed to its furthest extreme. And entering it requires a particular quality of willingness that not every soul feels ready for immediately upon arrival. The trees here are so large and so close together that the forest floor receives almost no ambient light from above, and what light does filter through is so transformed by its passage through multiple layers of canopy that it arrives green and cool and ancient. A light that feels as though it is coming not from any sky, but from the earth itself, welling upward through the root systems and through the deep soil, and finding its way to the surface in a gentle, pervasive luminescence. The silence in Rillifain's grove is deeper than anywhere else in Arvandor. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of absolute fullness, a place so completely alive in every direction that no additional sound is necessary to confirm it. There is a place most accounts of Arvandor's sacred geography mention quietly, with the particular restraint of something that is too important to dramatize. It sits near the outermost edge of the plain, where the ancient forest begins to thin toward whatever lies beyond Arvandor's boundary, and the trees around it are healthy and tall, but hold a quality of stillness that distinguishes them from the forest elsewhere. The silver grass grows here exactly as it grows anywhere else. The amber light falls with the same warmth, but something in the air of this specific clearing carries the echo of the oldest grief in Elven history. This is the place where the memory of what Arishni was before she became Lold is most present, not as a haunting, not as any dark intrusion of her current nature into the plane she was expelled from, but as a sorrow the plane itself holds, the memory of a beloved who became an enemy, the specific grief that has no resolution because the person who caused the wound and the person who was loved are not entirely separable. Even now, even across all the ages that have passed since the fall, Elven souls who lost family to the dark, whose long mortal lives brought them into contact with the ancient divide between the surface elves and the drow, are often drawn here without quite knowing why. They find the clearing and sit in its silver grass and feel the full weight of what it means to be a people still carrying a wound from the very beginning of their existence. And Arvandor holds that weight with them. The forest does not hurry them. It does not offer false comfort or premature resolution. It surrounds them with the same patient beauty as everywhere else, and lets the grief be what grief is, which is love that has nowhere left to go. And it holds that love carefully, the way you hold something irreplaceable that is also very fragile, with both hands and with your full attention, for as long as it needs to be held. Section 5. Arvandor's echo across the mortal world. The elves of Faerun do not speak of Arvandor the way a pilgrim speaks of a holy city they hope one day to visit. They do not speak of it the way a scholar speaks of a place they have read about in texts, but never seen. They speak of it the way someone speaks of a home they left long ago, one they remember in their body as much as in their mind, one whose particular quality of light they find themselves reaching for in quiet moments without always knowing why. Arvandor is not an abstract promise in Elven culture. It is the living architecture behind everything that Elven civilization has ever built, every city they raised, every forest they tended, every tradition they maintained across the vast, slow centuries of their presence on the mortal world. To understand Elven culture at any depth is to understand that every aspect of it is in conversation with Arvandor. The plane is not simply the destination. It is the source. It is the thing the elves on the material plane have always been reaching back toward, building something in mortal soil that carries the memory of what it felt like before the crossing, before the first elf woke beneath a mortal sky and understood that they were somewhere that was not home. The great elven cities that rose across Faerun over the long ages of elven presence all share certain architectural principles that become deeply meaningful when understood in this light. The obsession with height and open sky, the preference for materials that carry light rather than block it, pale stone, white wood, silver metalwork that catches the ambient illumination and redistributes it as warm scatter across interior spaces. The insistence on living things woven into every structure, trees growing through the centers of towers, vines given deliberate paths up walls, gardens not as decorative additions to buildings, but as structural elements without which the building would be incomplete. These are not merely aesthetic choices, not simply the expression of a culture that happens to prefer beauty. They are a continuous, centuries-long attempt to reconstruct something, to approximate in mortal materials and mortal soil the quality of a place that no mortal material can quite hold. Myth Drannor stands as the most complete expression of this ambition that Faerun ever produced. At its height, during the centuries when it served as the shining center of elven civilization on the surface world, Myth Drannor was not simply a city. It was a theological argument made in stone and wood and light, a demonstration that elven culture at its most refined and most powerful could produce something that brushed the quality of Arvandor from this side of the veil. The weave of magical energy that suffused the city, that gave it the quality of near-divine potency, making it the most magically active location on Faerun for its entire existence, was not incidental to the architectural vision. It was the point. Magic in elven understanding is not separate from the divine. It is the medium through which the divine presses through into the material world. A city saturated with the weave was a city saturated with the presence of the Seldarine. And that presence was the closest approximation of Arvandor that could be sustained beneath a mortal sun. The tragedy of Myth Drannor's fall, when it came through the terrible event known as the Weeping War, carried a weight far beyond the political and military. Cities fall for political and military reasons all the time, and other peoples mourn their fallen cities as losses of wealth or power or strategic position. When Myth Drannor fell to the army of darkness in the Year of Doom, the elves mourned it as something closer to a theological rupture. The argument had been met with the world's answer, which was that the mortal world does not sustain things. It cycles, it rises and falls, and every single thing built upon it is temporary. The city of silver towers and living magic, and the closest earthly approximation of the eternal twilight of the divine home, was reduced to ruins within a mortal span of conflict. And the elves who survived carried that knowledge into everything that came afterward. The retreat, that long withdrawal of elven civilization from the deep engagement with the mortal world that myth Draenor represented, is sometimes misread by historians of other races as a kind of surrender, a giving up. But this reading misses the spiritual dimension entirely. The elves did not simply tire of the mortal world. The retreat was shaped by a complex mixture of forces, including the mounting pressure of younger races, expanding into lands the elves had long held, the grief of myth Draenor's fall, and something that reads in the older traditions as almost a divine prompting, an inward turning that the most spiritually sensitive elves described not as a choice made from exhaustion, but as a call answered from a place of clarity. The elves who retreated to places like Evermeet did not go because they had given up. They went because the attempt to hold Arvandor in mortal stone had taught them something that needed to be integrated. And integration requires stillness. What the retreat ultimately expressed was a recalibration of how the elven people understood their relationship with their divine home. The attempt to build Arvandor on the material plane was a gesture of love, yes, but perhaps a misdirected one. The right relationship with Arvandor was not to replicate it here, but to orient toward it there. To live in the mortal world as the mortal world requires, to be present in it, to love it honestly for what it is, rather than for what it might be made to resemble, and to trust that the journey home at the end of the long life was guaranteed regardless of whether any city on Faerun managed to approximate the quality of the destination. This reorientation expressed itself in Elven spiritual practice in ways that are visible to anyone paying attention. The reverie deepened in its significance, rather than simply a daily necessity, a biological function analogous to a human's need for sleep. The reverie was increasingly understood as the primary spiritual practice of Elven life, the daily touching of Arvandor's edge, the continuous maintenance of the relationship with the divine home across the full span of a long life. The Elven practice of the long walk, the tradition of elder elves spending increasing portions of their later centuries in extended reverie, sometimes walking physically through wild forests for months or years at a stretch, while primarily living in the meditative inner space, became more widespread and more ritually significant in the post-retreat period. The songs that Elven culture produced in those centuries carry a quality that distinguishes them from the songs of the myth Draenor era. They hold a patient love for the mortal world that is also a form of homesickness for somewhere else. Both feelings present simultaneously without either one canceling the other. The elven relationship with time is perhaps the deepest expression of Arvandor's influence on mortal elven culture. An elf who has lived 3 centuries has watched human civilizations rise from villages to empires and collapse back to fields. They have outlived the grandchildren of people who were alive when they were young. They have seen rivers change course and forests grow over the ruins of cities that were considered permanent. This experience does not make elves detached from time. It makes them intimate with it in a way that produces a particular kind of grief that is one of the defining emotional conditions of elven life. Shorter-lived peoples observe it from the outside and call it elvish melancholy. But it is not melancholy in the human sense. It is something more precise. It is the feeling of loving the mortal world completely, while being constitutionally incapable of pretending that it lasts. It is the ache of every beautiful thing seen clearly, without the protection that shorter-lived creatures have the ability to believe, or at least not be daily confronted with the evidence against the belief that beautiful things endure. Arvandor answers this grief not by negating it, but by providing the deepest possible context for it. The mortal world does not last, and this is true, and the grief of that truth is real and should not be minimized. And at the same time, the soul endures. The elven spirit carries every moment of that mortal life in perfect detail through whatever comes after. And the beauty of those moments is not diminished by their pastness. If anything, the particular quality of elven memory makes those mortal moments more vivid for having ended. The loss sharpens them, makes them precise. The specific afternoon in a specific forest on Faerun, 300 mortal years ago, when the light fell through the canopy at a particular angle, and someone you loved said something quiet and true, is not less beautiful for being gone. And you carry it with you, intact, into a place that is itself nothing but the distillation of that quality of beauty, preserved without the corrosion of time. The drow exist as the most painful counterpoint to all of this. Split from the larger elven family by the consequences of Arishne's ancient betrayal, driven underground and transformed by their long centuries beneath the earth and beneath Lolt's will. The dark elves carry the same fundamental elven spirit into circumstances that Arvandor was never designed to address. Lolt's domain in the abyss is the direct inversion of everything Arvandor is. Where Arvandor offers rest without condition, the abyss offers consumption. Where the eternal twilight of the divine glade holds souls gently and without judgment, Lolt holds her followers' souls as resources, fuel for the architecture of power she has been building since her expulsion from the plane she tried to destroy. Illustrae's significance in this context is the thread of light that runs through the darkest part of the elven story. She carried the warmth of the Seldarine into places where no Seldarine warmth was supposed to reach. And her worship among drow who rejected Lolt's path was dangerous in a way that requires the word dangerous to carry its full weight. Not metaphorically dangerous, but actively, mortally, daily dangerous. The kind of faith that could not be practiced openly, could not be sung above a whisper, could not be expressed in communities that would not immediately turn lethal against it. And yet it persisted across centuries and across the deepest underground cities. The moonlit dance of Elistrae continued to find practitioners willing to risk everything to maintain a connection with something most of them had never seen and could only barely imagine. The silver light of Arvandor filtered through a goddess who had chosen exile willingly, catching in the hands of drow who were born in a place as far from it as anything in the cosmos can be. There is something in this persistence that says something essential about what Arvandor represents for Elven culture as a whole. It is not a reward for the obedient. It is not a destination reserved for those who lived their lives within approved traditions and maintained the correct theological affiliations. The pull of Arvandor, that deep-coded recognition of the place from which Elven existence originates, runs through every elf regardless of the path they walked in life. It runs through the high elf in their silver city and through the wood elf in their deep forest and through the sea elf beneath the waves of Seyrose and through the drow in the lightless depths of the earth. The divine home does not recognize the divisions that history and conflict and the long sorrow of a sundered people have drawn between those who carry Corallin's essence. It recognizes only the essence itself. This is the deepest thing Arvandor offers, not just to the elves, but to anyone who sits with its lore long enough to feel the full weight of it. It offers the possibility that belonging is not something you earn, that there is a place in the cosmos that was made for you before you existed, that has been holding your place across all the ages of your mortal life, that will still be holding it when you arrive, that knows you in a language older than any language you have spoken, that waits with the patience of eternity and the warmth of something that has never once doubted you were coming. Somewhere in the amber light between the trees, a soul who lived long and loved fully and lost more than they thought they could bear is sitting at last in silver grass, feeling the weight lifting from them one layer at a time, looking up at the warm stars of the divine sky, understanding finally and completely that the search is over, that this is the place, that the light they brushed against every single day of their long life in the deep stillness of the reverie was not a dream, not a metaphor, not a comfort offered by a theology that needed to say something kind. Thank you for being here. Rest well